Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. Today we will be taking some notes. You can find these notes as usual on the Google Classroom under the Classwork tab. They're labeled Notes 318. If you open them up, you will see that you have our traditional notes with the red text boxes for you to click and fill in as the words appear in this YouTube video. You will notice for slides 3 and 4 that you have some maps to help you answer these questions. These are brainstorming questions, so I expect you to use the maps to help you answer the questions, but there is no right or wrong answer. I just want you to start thinking about this transition from city-states to empires and how this will affect the civilizations of Era 3. Do not forget that you can pause or rewatch any part of this video if you need to, as you do not want to miss any important content. With that said, we're going to go ahead and get started. All right, today we will be focusing on power and authority and looking at how different civilizations during Era 3 used it and distributed it. Although the timeline mentions a Greek empire, there was never a unified Greek empire under one authority that controlled vast territories. Rather, there was an allegiance of Greek city-states called the Denlian League that was controlled by the city-state of Athens that had far-reaching influence. It is different from Rome because it did not completely control as large an area and because there was less central authority. Also, not all Greek city-states were a part of it. So again, we start to question whether this is a Greek or Athenian empire. You can see in green that we have independent members of Greece. These would be independent city-states. Then we have dependent members. So these are people that would rely on the Greeks, the Greek government, and Greek trade going on in Athens to support themselves. And then you have purple. These are allies, people that work together with Athens and each other. This map is slide 2 of your notes for today, and you have 2 questions to answer with it. First, which societies shown on this map and identified in the map key do not seem to be empires, and how do you know? Again, this is a brainstorming question, so I just want you to think about it and make your best guess based on the information in the map. Again, make sure that you look at this map key and use it again to determine which societies may not actually be empires. And then think about some of the key features and characteristics we've already touched about with empires and why these places might not be empires yet. Your second question asks you to compare the size of the areas that are labeled empires and compare what you see. Look for both similarities and differences related to their size. Your slide 3 has this map. It's a zoomed in of the first one, looking specifically at the Mediterranean Sea region. So with Rome, the area of Roman control that's in blue, and the Greek city-states were not empires during the time shown on the map, what do you think they were? So again, these are regions that are not yet labeled as empires. Well, what would they be instead of empires? Make sure that you explain your thinking and be specific when describing what they are. One thing that you might have said that they are city-states or polis. This means community, and it was its immediate surrounding territory and recognized no higher political authority than itself. The city-state has its own view of power and authority as reflected in its political structure. It also has its own identity reflected in its own culture and social institutions. It is not controlled by a larger body like a country. So I want you to answer this question at the bottom. What is the difference between a city-state and an empire? Think about the city-states that we talked about last unit, like Babylonia and the other Mesopotamian city-states. Think also about the Greek city-states if we've talked about them so far. So when talking about power and authority, we do need to make sure that we have a good definition of the two. So first, what is power? Power is the ability, strength, and capacity to do something, while authority is the right to use power to enforce rules and give orders. So while you might have the ability to do something, so you might have the power to do something, it could not work still because you might not have the authority to do something. So these are two ideas, while similar. You need authority in order to enforce rules, but you also need to have the power to do it. So they go hand in hand. Power and authority in a society is about having the right to decide things such as the rules people have to live by, how people give money or work to the government, when to go to war, and how to solve problems or create justice. It is also about having the ability, strength, or capacity to act on and enforce these decisions. So quickly just think, who had the power in Greece and Rome? Who had the authority? And how is it different in each society? So here's one example. We've talked very briefly about Athens before and how Athens will be the first democracy. And we'll look more specific at the different types of government that were popular during this time period. We've mentioned monarchy so far, oligarchy, autocracy, and now democracy. So we'll spend a little more time comparing these different forms of government next week. But as a reminder, Athens will be the first democracy. We saw this in our Mankind video when they were voting whether to go to war, and they would use different color stones to cast their vote. In Athens, there was a basic structure that was followed throughout the city-state. At the top and the largest group was the assembly. This was open to all citizens, and they made decisions by arguing and voting. Then those decisions would be brought before the Council of 500. These were representatives of the 10 tribes, and they would carry out the decisions of the assembly. And then the final group, which was the smallest group, were elected officials like generals and judges who had very specific jobs. They derived the power from the people as they had to be elected, and they would be the ones that would enforce the decisions of the assembly and the council. After the Denlian League fell apart, it became a part of Rome. So the Denlian League is the one that focused on democracy and the balancing of power between the people and elected officials. As we switch to being part of the Roman Empire, we will begin to see that government is going to change. In the beginning, Rome was a republic, and most free men were allowed to vote. However, those that were wealthier were given more power and influence. This system of government did not last long and was turned into an empire after the military leader Sulla declared himself dictator. Sulla led his military to overthrow the republic and established himself as an autocrat, so someone that had sole power and authority in the empire, and created the title of dictator. Fighting between the military and political leaders was consistent in the early part of the Roman Empire, which led to the assassination of Pompey and Julius Caesar, the first emperor of Rome. The assassination of Julius Caesar is probably one that you have heard about, and it is popular in pop culture. The Ides of March is March 15th, so Monday of this week, and it is the anniversary of Caesar's death. A lot of people say that day has bad luck, and that you need to be careful on the Ides of March. You'll also find references to it in a lot of different memes. The story of Caesar is that he was stabbed over 20 times, and this rebellion by his political advisors was led by his best friend Brutus. So if you ever hear anyone say to Brutus, or call you Brutus, it means that they're calling you a bad friend, someone that kind of stabbed them in the back. So these are my jokes for today. But when I mentioned that Julius Caesar was the first emperor of Rome, an emperor is a new title that we have not discussed yet. So an emperor is a monarch that rules over a vast territory, sometimes several countries, and is considered to be above kings. Augustus, born Gaius Octavius, was the emperor who reunited the territory after it was split by the Second Triumvirate, and ruled from 27 BC until his death in 14 AD. The Second Triumvirate was the government that emerged after the stabbing of Caesar. Augustus ruled and took the name Caesar Augustus to honor his great uncle Julius Caesar, who had adopted him as his son and heir. Augustus would later defeat the assassins of Caesar with the help of Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus. Augustus will use this assassination of Caesar's as a fire to drive him to lead an army to overthrow the Second Triumvirate, and then use his two friends to establish new territory. When Augustus dies, his two friends, Mark Antony and Marcus Lepidus, will take over, and this will cause many issues and part of the downfall of Rome. You might have heard of Mark Antony before, as he will go on to marry Cleopatra of Egypt, and they will eventually die together as Marcus Lepidus leads an invasion into Egypt, and instead of surrendering, they kill themselves. That is all for the notes for today. We will be talking more about Greece and Rome and this transition of power starting next week. If you have any questions, let me know. Otherwise, I hope you have a great rest of your day.